I am the Swarm. Author, Quantum Wizard. Chapter 21, The Neighbor. A black ant appeared, a scout from their ranks. It wandered aimlessly, occasionally probing objects with its antennae. Luo Wen crept closer, inspecting the surroundings. The closer to the direction the ant had come from, the more ants there were, 7 or 8 within Luo Wen's view. However, this lone scout was isolated, with the nearest companion a full 2 meters away, a vast distance for ants, making timely communication between them nearly impossible. Luo Wen focused on the scout and quickly closed the distance. Even as he advanced swiftly, Luo Wen remained vigilant, evading a trap laid by a foul-smelling worm along the way. Unlike his first encounter, where he'd been caught off guard, Luo Wen was now prepared. The traps were easy to spot, subtle swirls in the dirt betrayed their presence. This black ant was much smaller than Luo Wen, a perfect target for him. Sensing Luo Wen's approach, the ant frantically waved its antennae, but it was too late. Luo Wen was already within reach, his sturdy burrowing limb swinging toward the ant's head. The black ant's poor eyesight was almost a weakness, they relied primarily on the olfactory sensors on their antennae for navigation and food detection. Caught off guard, the ant could only take the hit. Luo Wen's strike left the black ant dazed, and before it could recover, Luo Wen bit off one of its hind legs. The ant's remaining legs scraped the ground, producing faint sounds that seemed to be a cry for help. However, with no nearby allies able to receive the signal, the black ant's call went unanswered. Alone, it attempted to fight back but was no match for Luo Wen. Its weaker build and smaller jaws couldn't penetrate Luo Wen's protective exoskeleton. Although ants are known for their tremendous strength, supposedly capable of feats far beyond humans if scaled to human size in this miniature battleground, exoskeletal armor gave everyone an edge. After a short struggle, Luo Wen disabled 2 more of the ant's limbs. It attempted to flee but lacked balance with only 3 legs remaining. As the black ant turned to escape, exposing its back to Luo Wen, it sealed its fate. Luo Wen quickly pinned the ant's slender waist with his burrowing limb. The ant twisted and snapped its jaws in vain, unable to breach his armor. Luo Wen silenced its resistance by using saliva and mud to fashion a makeshift gag, sealing its jaws. Dragging the subdued ant, Luo Wen retreated from the scene. Back in one of his pre-dug tunnels, Luo Wen moved quickly toward his underground chamber. Despite the ant's continuous struggles, its sealed mandibles rendered it harmless. Nearing the chamber, Luo Wen paused, released the ant onto the tunnel floor, and blocked the route behind him, forcing the ant toward the chamber. Terrified, the ant hobbled on its 3 legs, obediently heading toward the room. Upon emerging from the tunnel, the ant lost its footing and tumbled into the vast cavern. The black beetle, roaming the room, stopped in its tracks, antennae extending toward the sound of the fallen ant. In the cavern's darkness, sight was almost useless. For creatures without Luo Wen's enhanced compound eyes, the space was a void. Sound perception, however, became critical. The beetle's massive body made the ground tremble, alerting the black ant to its presence. Its antennae reached out, colliding midair with the beetle's. After a brief entanglement, both insects determined the other wasn't an ally. Before the ant could react, the beetle's spiked mandibles closed around its body, severing it cleanly. Even bisected, the ant's resilience kept it alive, its antennae flailing wildly. The beetle finished the job, repeatedly clamping down until the remains were unrecognizable. Observing from the shadows, Luo Wen nodded in satisfaction. The test was successful. The black beetle, though uncommunicative, proved a reliable guardian. He could now entrust it with the room's defense. Satisfied, Luo Wen entered the chamber. The mangled remains of the black ant didn't appeal to his appetite, and the beetle, a herbivore, wouldn't touch them either. Fortunately, the brood nest wasn't as picky. Luo Wen gathered the intact parts to feed it and then dragged back a tree root as a reward for the beetle. The beetle accepted the offering indifferently, as if Luo Wen's provisions were only natural. Every time Luo Wen saw this dumb creature, it irked him. While he wasn't a vengeful person, he vowed to recycle the beetle once resources were less scarce. With the beetle guarding the chamber, Luo Wen rested briefly before setting off again. The scout's direction suggested a nearby ant nest, his new neighbors. He needed to investigate and assess this potential threat. Days later, Luo Wen reflected in his chamber. Absorbing the black beetle's genes had caused a growth spurt, he had grown from the size of a fingernail to that of a coin. Consequently, his tunnels now felt cramped, and he had spent the day widening them. This chamber, likely to serve as his base for some time, now felt like home. Over the past days, Luo Wen had mapped the surrounding 100 meters. Wandering insects came and went, posing no real threat. The most significant danger was the black ant colony, a permanent neighbor just 50 meters from his nest. The colony was massive but not an immediate concern. Their scouts rarely ventured within 10 meters of Luo Wen's lair, and those who did mysteriously disappeared. Their losses had prompted the ants to reduce scouting in his direction, temporarily easing his worries. Chapter 22, Experiments. Luo Wen muttered complaints as he found himself traveling farther to hunt lone black ants, dragging them back to the nest. The extra effort annoyed him, but it was worth it. Days of feeding the brood nest with meat had finally restored its vitality, enabling it to begin another wave of spawning. As he worked, Luo Wen reflected on his previous approach. Last time, he directly hatched a fully grown insect, a black beetle. While it only took 2 days to mature from egg to larva and then to adult, Luo Wen suspected it might have skipped a pupal stage, condensing 4 growth stages into one. Though this yielded a combat-ready ally, the process consumed an enormous amount of the brood nest's flesh to sustain the beetle's massive body. This led Luo Wen to a hypothesis: would allowing the brood nest to lay eggs and letting them develop naturally be far less resource-intensive? His observations supported the idea. Over the past few days, constant feeding of tree roots had caused the black beetle to grow slightly. Initially, its undersized form was due to the brood nest's limited size at the time of its creation. Luo Wen had thought the beetle was akin to a factory-made product, fixed at manufacture. But this new organic biotechnology was unlike the mechanical systems he once knew. It held endless possibilities. Seeing the black beetle continue to develop, Luo Wen realized he'd underestimated the brood nest's potential. It was time to try producing an egg and letting it hatch naturally. This time, he chose to create an ant egg using unaltered black ant genetic material, aiming to test whether it carried a communication system. The brood nest produced a small, pale yellow egg without any noticeable strain. Luo Wen was thrilled. His hypothesis seemed correct. Producing eggs for natural development was indeed the optimal approach. However, his excitement was short-lived. As he stared at the fragile egg, he realized he had no experience in egg care. Before he could devise a solution, tragedy struck. The black beetle, wandering nearby, stepped on the egg. Its sharp claws pierced the delicate shell, spilling its contents onto the ground. Luo Wen froze, dumbfounded. The beetle, oblivious to its actions, continued patrolling. The egg's stillness, combined with its tiny size relative to the beetle, had made it an unnoticeable casualty. Blaming himself for his lapse in focus, Luo Wen accepted that the egg was beyond saving. Though frustrating, the incident sparked new thoughts. While the brood nest evolved from Luo Wen and was technically part of him, its creations were not true Ephi-ish. Both the black beetle and the egg were proof. If Ephi-ish could be bred this way, they wouldn't be so rare. Instead, the brood nest's products were like living machines, designed for specific tasks. While there might be other traits Luo Wen had yet to observe, these creatures were undeniably fragile and required care. The black beetle, clearly unsuited for such duties, lacked intelligence and merely patrolled around the nest. Luo Wen needed a better solution. After some thought, Luo Wen issued a command to the brood nest. Half a day later, it produced 2 miniature black ants. Unlike the black beetle's birth, the brood nest only appeared slightly weakened, not critically drained. Learning from past mistakes, Luo Wen shielded the newborn ants with his body while they were still weak, ensuring the patrolling beetle would avoid them. Compared to the fragile egg, these ants were much larger. After a short adjustment period, they shakily got to their feet. The ants began interacting, touching antennae as if exchanging information. Luo Wen watched in confusion, wondering what was happening. Did they have a communication system that he lacked? Suddenly, he felt a jolt in ability within him awakened. This latent skill seemed to have evolved alongside the brood nest. Luo Wen realized it allowed him to release pheromones, a form of communication he hadn't needed before. Upon awakening this ability, Luo Wen immediately understood the ants' exchange. They were expressing confusion and waiting for instructions. The pheromones were spread across their bodies and antennae, allowing others to interpret them through contact. Luo Wen, however, could directly see or sense the pheromones, bypassing the need for physical touch. Fascinated by this new communication method, Luo Wen quickly mastered it. He emitted a pheromone signal conveying, "Follow me," and the ants obediently moved to his side, touching him briefly before standing behind him. Interesting, Luo Wen thought. He led the ants into a tunnel, issuing another command, "Dig together." The three insects began burrowing in unison. Luo Wen tried a more complex command, dig over there. The ants responded with confusion, emitting pheromones that expressed their lack of understanding. Seriously? That's too much for them. Luo Wen muttered. Their intelligence seemed disappointingly low. Testing further, Luo Wen left one ant stationary while guiding the other to a nearby location. He then issued a command, bring the other one here. This time, the ant understood. It scurried back to its companion, communicated briefly via antennae, and returned with the other ant in tow. Through these tests, Luo Wen identified the limits of their understanding. Commands needed clear, specific targets. For instance, go there was too vague, but return to the nest was easily understood and flawlessly executed. With this knowledge, Luo Wen prepared for more experiments to further explore his new abilities and the capabilities of the brood nest's creations. Chapter 23, Busy Days. Luo Wen decided to lead his ants to search for food. Surprisingly, they showed no interest in tree roots, taking only small sips of water. Luo Wen was both amused and annoyed by their picky nature. Even I'm gnawing on tree roots, and you two dare to be choosy? That's embarrassing, you know. The ants, unable to understand such complex sentiments, ignored him completely. A sigh escaped Luo Wen. The loneliness of his situation crept in as he realized the communication barrier between him and his creations. After the meager meal, Luo Wen broke off 3 tree roots and gave the command, bring them back to the nest. Unfortunately, he overestimated the ants' intelligence. They neither optimized their angles for dragging the large roots nor handled the task with finesse. Instead, they simply grabbed the roots and pulled recklessly, often getting them stuck in the tunnel. To accommodate them, Luo Wen halved the size of the roots. Finally, the ants managed to drag them without issue, but the combined amount they carried was still less than a tenth of what Luo Wen could handle alone. Back at the nest, Luo Wen divided the roots, giving some to the black beetle and the rest to the brood nest. While the brood nest absorbed the nutrients, Luo Wen decided to name the ants, one was Black 2, the other Black 3. However, after testing, he realized his effort was wasted. The ants could only comprehend vague pronouns like you or them, and names were meaningless to them. Despite this setback, Luo Wen took solace in the simplicity it saved him the mental strain of naming future followers. Next, Luo Wen directed the ants to dig a chamber near the nest, a dedicated incubation room to keep eggs safe from the wandering black beetle. Once the brood nest regained some vitality, Luo Wen ordered the production of a new egg. He carefully shielded it from the beetle and instructed the ants to guard it. The ants understood the command. One picked up the egg, and under Luo Wen's guidance, placed it in the incubation room. Satisfied, Luo Wen initially considered leaving them to their task but decided to use one ant for an experiment. He gave Black 2 the command, search for food. To his surprise, the ant understood and began moving toward a tunnel. Intrigued, Luo Wen followed, curious about where it would search. As expected, the ant headed to the tree roots they had visited earlier. It bit into a piece of bark and began feeding. After a moment, 2 droplets of water formed on its mandibles. Luo Wen was amazed he couldn't fathom how the ant extracted water from the root or managed to carry it. When the ant noticed Luo Wen nearby, it turned and presented the water droplet to him. Stunned, Luo Wen realized it was offering him food. The gesture was amusing and awkward. As a bug, Luo Wen couldn't bring himself to accept food directly from another bug. Instead, he issued a new command, search for food and bring it back to the nest. Obediently, the ant carried the water droplet home. Luo Wen sighed, realizing the inefficiency of micromanaging his followers. With growing numbers, this method would soon become impractical. Following the ant back to the nest, Luo Wen observed an unexpected behavior. Without needing further instruction, the ant gave the droplet to the ant guarding the egg. This sparked an idea: these ants possessed basic instincts and could act autonomously when not given specific orders. Excited, Luo Wen conducted more experiments. Over several hours, he tested various commands and found that precise instructions weren't always necessary. Without commands like stand guard or stay here, the ants would automatically find tasks to do. They would search for food when hungry, maintain the incubation room's humidity, and generally function without Luo Wen's intervention. Relieved, Luo Wen instructed the brood nest to produce 10 eggs, the maximum it could manage daily without harming itself. For the next few days, the nest consistently produced 10 eggs and 2 small-sized mature ants. However, Luo Wen was busier than ever. The ants couldn't survive on water alone, and their undersized forms made them incapable of hunting the larger black ants. Luo Wen had to personally hunt and drag back enough prey to sustain the brood nest and the growing ant population. The workload was grueling. He subsisted on tree roots while the ants feasted on meat. This lopsided dynamic frustrated Luo Wen. I'm the boss here, yet I'm the one eating scraps while my underlings enjoy a feast. This isn't how things are supposed to go. He couldn't help but recall the hapless white grub he'd used as a tool in the past. This can't continue. I need to change things. Thankfully, Black 2 and Black 3 had grown rapidly, bolstered by the steady supply of ant meat. Now large enough to join hunts, they acted as transporters, reducing Luo Wen's burden slightly. Still, with 2 new ants being born daily and the potential for eggs to hatch, Luo Wen's workload continued to grow. He considered sending the ants to the surface to forage, but their reduced size and incomplete development made them too vulnerable. Losing even one ant, given the effort it took to produce them, would be a heavy blow. For now, he decided to endure the tough early days, knowing things would improve once the ants could forage independently. After 2 more days of hard work, the first batch of eggs began to hatch. Chapter 24, New Discoveries. The newly hatched ant larvae looked like little handles growing out of the eggs. Placed side by side with the eggs, it was difficult to tell them apart at first glance. The hatching of the eggs signaled an imminent population explosion in Luo Wen's brood. But before that, his workload increased yet again. The larvae required mature black ants to partially digest food and regurgitate it into a form they could consume, a task as revolting as it was necessary. And Luo Wen was still the sole provider of meat for the entire hive. To make matters worse, the black ant colony, noticing the dwindling number of scouts returning, had significantly reduced the number sent toward Luo Wen's territory. Other than a few lost stragglers, Luo Wen hadn't seen a direct scout approach in days. His hunting range now extended dangerously close to the enemy nest. From higher ground, his keen vision could spot the busy entrance of the black ant colony. Although Luo Wen didn't dare provoke them directly at their doorstep, he observed from a safe distance, hoping to learn about their habits. He aimed to improve his understanding of colony management by studying them. During hunts, Luo Wen now brought along 6 or 7 of his own black ants. Whenever he killed a black ant from the neighboring nest, his ants would swarm over the carcass, feasting on it and carrying the leftovers back to the brood. The journey back to the nest was made easier with Luo Wen having already cleared out most hazards, and the ants' pheromone trails ensured they wouldn't get lost. Hunting grounds were now only a dozen meters away from the enemy nest, while his lair was over 50 meters away. The long travel time gave Luo Wen opportunities to observe and strategize while his ants handled transportation. This new approach significantly reduced his workload, as he no longer had to spend most of his day hauling food back and forth. Though the ants were slower than him, they were tireless and never slacked off. Luo Wen, by contrast, often needed to rest and reflect on his bug life after each trip. As a result, their efficiency was nearly comparable. One day, while waiting for his transport team to return, Luo Wen witnessed something strange near the enemy nest. A new species of insect, with a yellow-brown body, nonchalantly entered the black ant colony. Strangely, the ants didn't attack it. Instead, they stepped aside to let it pass. This baffled Luo Wen. The nest was sacred territory for the black ants, and his growing entomological knowledge confirmed this new insect wasn't related to them. The intruder had a flattened, elongated abdomen covered in a hard shell, which immediately marked it as a different species. How had it gained free access to the black ant colony? Luo Wen couldn't figure it out. Days passed, and Luo Wen, freed from transport duties and occasionally indulging in extra meals, grew noticeably larger. Despite absorbing black beetle genes, his head hadn't developed the iconic mandibles. Luo Wen speculated it was due to a lack of space. His massive compound eyes dominated his head, leaving no room for large mandibles. Moreover, the black beetle's flat head allowed for leverage when using its mandibles, whereas Luo Wen's narrow, seed-shaped head would render such appendages ineffective. The likely reason, though, was that mandibles would hinder his digging, a key survival skill. It seemed his body had evolved to optimize digging efficiency by discarding traits that could obstruct it. Luo Wen couldn't help but wonder if this stemmed from his cautious, survivalist nature. One day, Luo Wen spotted a massive ant near the enemy nest's entrance. It was several times larger than the regular black ants, with sturdier legs and powerful, sharp mandibles. Its formidable appearance made it clear that its combat abilities far surpassed those of ordinary ants. Luo Wen had a realization. Drawing from knowledge learned long ago in kindergarten, he concluded the regular black ants must be worker ants, while this giant was likely a soldier ant. Though he had been calling them black ants, Luo Wen knew they weren't Earth insects. On this alien planet, they merely resembled ants he was familiar with. Without any naming skills, he had simply borrowed Earth terms. Until now, Luo Wen had only encountered worker ants and assumed the colony lacked soldier ants. Seeing one now confirmed that their colony had hidden military strength. Luo Wen wondered if this world's environment mirrored Earth's to the point that its insects were so similar. However, he had yet to encounter any flying creatures, a stark contrast to Earth, where such insects were abundant. The lack of aerial species puzzled him, but Luo Wen reasoned it might be due to his limited exploration. Perhaps his current habitat simply didn't support flying creatures, or maybe his perspective as a ground-dwelling bug skewed his observations. Thanks to the transport ants, Luo Wen now had time to reflect. He ruled out the possibility of this being the wizard planet, a scenario where his species, the Ephiish, was purportedly unrivaled. After all this time, Luo Wen still couldn't overwhelm an ant colony. Something was clearly wrong either with his own development, the environment, or both. Adding to his doubts, Luo Wen had yet to see reptiles, mammals, or humanoid creatures, none of the life forms common to Earth. Everything pointed to him being in a completely alien world. Though his conclusions had gaps, believing this gave him psychological comfort. Seeing the soldier ant reminded Luo Wen of his own limitations. Recently emboldened by his growth, he had thought himself close to conquering the black ant colony. Now, this formidable soldier ant had poured cold water on his ambitions. Although he was larger than regular ants, the soldier ant's length was twice his, and its mandibles were far deadlier than his simple armor. Luo Wen knew he couldn't face it alone. Soldier ants were built for combat, while he was a part-time fighter and full-time digger. As he mulled over these thoughts, a flash of yellow-brown passed to his right, catching his attention. Chapter 25, Yellow Bug. Luo Wen's eyes were exceptionally sharp when it came to moving objects. As soon as the yellow-brown creature entered his clear line of sight, he immediately noticed it. A closer look confirmed it was the same type of bug he'd seen swaggering into the ant nest earlier. Was it the exact same one he'd seen that day? Luo Wen wasn't sure. He suffered from bug face blindness, he couldn't even tell the difference between Black 2 and Black 3, who were constantly buzzing around him, let alone a bug he'd only seen once. Seeing this guy sparked a thought in Luo Wen's mind. If he couldn't beat the soldier ants, surely he could take on a yellow bug about the same size as himself? What's more, he was always eager to have a cordial and friendly interaction with any new species he encountered, preferably by tasting them. Who knew? He might just acquire some unique gene fragments. Calculating that the transport team would take a little while to return, Luo Wen wasted no time. He identified a safe route and quickly scuttled toward the yellow bug. The yellow bug was lounging leisurely, completely unaware of Luo Wen's approach. This was precisely why he still had his large compound eyes despite their hindrance during digging. They offered an unparalleled visual advantage. It was like playing a game where everyone else's map was shrouded in fog, while his was fully revealed. Luo Wen opened with his signature move, the face-smashing hammer strike, which had become the opening act of the Luo-style insect combat technique. Regardless of who his opponent was, the meeting always began with a heavy blow from his burrowing limbs. This unique greeting left the yellow bug completely dazed. Before it could react, the second move of the Luo-style combat technique, Peach Blossoms in Full Bloom, smashed into its face, knocking it off balance. This move was very similar to the first, both involved a heavy slam with his burrowing limbs. Then came the third move, Vicious Dog Pounce. Luo Wen's large mandibles clamped down on the yellow bug's forelimb with a loud crack, snapping it off cleanly. He then alternated between the first and second moves repeatedly. Luo Wen's combat experience had grown significantly recently, very few black ant scouts could withstand even 10 moves against him. The yellow bug, clearly inexperienced with such a scientific and advanced fighting style, was utterly helpless. Its body parts were rapidly being reduced to a scattered mess. Throughout the fight, Luo Wen noticed that the yellow bug continuously released pheromones. The scent felt somewhat similar to that of Black 2 and Black 3. Luo Wen began to understand how this yellow bug could swagger into a neighbor's home unchallenged. Unfortunately for it, Luo Wen didn't rely on pheromones to identify enemies, he relied on his eyes and brain. The yellow bug's unique ability had no effect. Having lost the initiative and being outmatched in intelligence, it could barely mount a defense before meeting its end. Luo Wen felt the battle was a bit underwhelming. Despite the yellow bug appearing larger than a black worker ant, it was all show and no substance. Luo Wen hadn't even exerted his full strength before it fell. At this moment, he felt like slapping his burrowing limbs together and declaring, "Mission accomplished," but alas, there was no one to appreciate his wit. The loneliness of being a master was palpable. Dragging the yellow bug back to his earlier spot, Luo Wen waited a short while before the transport team appeared within his line of sight. When they arrived, he had most of them stay put while he took 2 black ants back to the battlefield. There, the remnants of the yellow bug's body were still scattered around, mostly severed limbs much larger than fly legs, and far too valuable to waste. After cleaning up the battlefield, Luo Wen returned to the main group. With an unexpected bonus harvest for the day, he decided not to linger at the spot any longer. He set off with the transport team to return. On the way, they encountered an unlucky black ant scout who had lost its way. Luo Wen demonstrated the Luo-style combat technique on it and then enthusiastically invited its remains back to the nest as a guest. Luo Wen personally dragged the yellow bug's body because he intended to enjoy this first specimen alone. Meanwhile, the transport team divided the scout's body and some parts of the yellow bug to carry back to the brood nest. He instructed the transport team to feed part of the haul to the brood nest, while the rest was left as rations for the black ants and larvae. These black ants were exceptionally skilled at feeding. Luo Wen had only needed to explain it once for them to grasp the concept immediately. As for the black beetle, it now had a new name, Big Black. The black ants, who only sucked sap from tree roots, couldn't fathom the concept of chewing through roots. Thus, Luo Wen had to take personal responsibility for Big Black's food supply. But Luo Wen was too busy to dig up roots for it today, so Big Black would just have to go hungry for now. It wouldn't die from missing 1 or 2 meals. Returning with the yellow bug to a small chamber he had recently excavated, Luo Wen entered his private space, a bedroom strictly off-limits to the black ants. Though small, the room had 2 escape tunnels and 1 connecting passage to the brood nest. All were sealed with mud mixed with saliva and camouflaged for safety. Finally alone with the yellow bug, Luo Wen cracked open its exoskeleton and skillfully devoured the muscle within. After finishing his sumptuous meal, Luo Wen had planned to rest but felt a twinge of guilt about Big Black. He summoned a black ant to clean up the food scraps and feed them to the brood nest. Meanwhile, he went to the tree roots to drink some sap and dig up a root for Big Black. No, that wasn't right. He specifically dug up a root for Big Black and drank some sap along the way. Returning, he stopped by the brood nest to check on it and reviewed the gene pool. Sure enough, a new gene fragment for pheromone mimicry had been added. This gene fragment was intriguing. Luo Wen wanted to test it out. Before sleeping, he kept hypnotizing himself into believing he desperately needed this ability, hoping his body's instincts would rise to the occasion. Upon waking, Luo Wen hurriedly checked his body and tested the new ability. It seemed he could now alter his own pheromones. He hadn't expected his instincts to be so effective. He'd truly gained the power of pheromone mimicry. To test it, he summoned a black ant and changed his pheromones. For ants, pheromones were like ID cards. A single sniff determined if someone was an ally. The black ant seemed puzzled and showed signs of agitation but didn't attack Luo Wen. Testing several more black ants, he found their reactions were similar. The behavior felt familiar, though he couldn't immediately recall why. Is it ineffective, or am I using it wrong? Luo Wen was puzzled, unsure of the issue. It wasn't until he saw Big Black wandering around that he realized. Big Black, lacking a pheromone communication system, still identified friend from foe, likely thanks to a recognition system built into the brood nest itself. The black ants' reaction had been familiar because they exhibited the same behavior toward Big Black. Relieved by this result, Luo Wen felt a sense of joy. Though the bug's intelligence wasn't high, their cunning moves often exceeded Luo Wen's expectations. He had genuinely feared that one day a yellow bug might sneak into his nest and cause trouble in his absence. That would have been a real headache. Now, he had nothing to worry about. In fact, he even looked forward to yellow bugs wandering in. They'd be delivering takeout, providing the brood nest with extra meals. Since his own ants weren't suitable for further testing, Luo Wen dug up another tree root to feed Big Black, then summoned the transport team and headed out. Even while experimenting, he couldn't neglect the hive's food supply. Luo Wen felt he was truly wearing himself out for the hive's development. He invited another lucky scout back to the hive and let the transport team carry it home. Luo Wen used this time to continue his experiments. Chapter 26, Infiltration. Luo Wen first targeted a lucky test subject, lucky because it didn't get to witness the opening move of Luo-style insect combat techniques. After observing the test subject, Luo Wen instinctively used his newly acquired ability. The pheromones emanating from his body began to subtly adjust. Pheromones are compounds that facilitate chemical communication between organisms. They are further categorized into various types, and almost all flora and fauna produce them. Examples include altruistic pheromones, selfish pheromones, synergistic pheromones, aggregation pheromones, trail pheromones, alarm pheromones, evacuation pheromones, and sex pheromones. Ant pheromones, for instance, are a mixture of various compounds, including the unique scent that identifies their colony. This functions like an ID card, allowing them to communicate with their kin. Luo Wen was now tweaking this specific pheromone. His new ability enabled him to hack into a neighboring colony's household registry and fabricate an identity. After completing the forgery, he displayed this information. As the distance to the scout ant shrank, it finally sensed an unfamiliar vibration approaching. Its antennae reached out inquisitively. The scout's antennae made contact with Luo Wen, sweeping back and forth across his body. Luo Wen waited tensely for the verdict. It was his first time using this ability, and he wasn't sure if it might fail. He remained prepared to strike at any moment. Fortunately, the scout's inspection yielded no abnormalities. Since Luo Wen only presented the bare minimum an ID card, the scout lost interest in him. It bypassed him and continued its search ahead. After some thought, Luo Wen repositioned himself to block the scout's path again. This time, he didn't just carry an ID card but also displayed the message, "There's food over there, follow me." The scout's antennae twitched for a moment before it actually decided to follow him. Leading it a short distance away from the nest, Luo Wen then showcased a move from his Luo-style insect combat technique. The scout, confused as to why one of its own was attacking, failed to counter before being swiftly killed. Luo Wen's eyes lit up, as he seemed to have discovered a new hunting method. Dragging the scout's corpse to the transport team's rendezvous point, Luo Wen left behind a pheromone signal indicating, "Take this back." Of course, the signal was crafted with the forged identity from the brood nest. This was a contingency plan in case he ventured too far and couldn't return in time. If the transport team returned without clear instructions and wandered aimlessly, it could end in disaster since the nest was less than 20 meters away. A wrong turn could be fatal. While Luo Wen's followers had grown in number, resources remained tight. Every effort to save or prepare for potential problems mattered. By sending the transport team on this extra trip, Luo Wen bought himself more time to explore his first infiltration mission. Brandishing his forged ID card, Luo Wen boldly approached the neighbor's front gate. Black ants swarmed the path, but they either ignored him outright or briefly touched him with their antennae before losing interest. Thus, Luo Wen breezed past multiple defensive layers, eventually arriving at the entrance of the ant nest. Peering into the pitch-black tunnel, he refrained from rushing inside. The ant nest previously harbored giant mandible soldier ants combat units. Who knew what other strange warriors might be lurking within? Although yellow bugs had nonchalantly entered this place before, their lives weren't as valuable as Luo Wen's. So, he opted for caution, no, prudence. He first burrowed to the area beneath the nest, his bristles sensing the dense network of hollow tunnels crisscrossing the underground. Around the ant nest, Luo Wen dug several escape routes. These tunnels were narrow, just wide enough for him to traverse. Should danger arise, he could retreat to the closest passage. While small worker ants posed little threat to him now, larger soldier ants would struggle to navigate these narrow routes. After preparing his escape routes, Luo Wen returned to the surface, heading back to the nest entrance. Taking a deep breath to calm his nerves, he ventured inside. The entrance was cluttered with chaotic pheromone signals. A large number of black ants moved in and out, making the seemingly spacious passage feel cramped. Despite Luo Wen's appearance, his coloration aside, there were no other similarities between him and the black ants. This colony only recognized IDs, not species or morphology. As long as you carried their ID, you were kin. Simple and crude. A massive soldier ant emerged from deeper within the tunnel, its bulky frame blocking most of the passageway. Its sheer size exerted an oppressive presence, reminding Luo Wen that fighting here would be less than ideal. Being discovered as an undocumented outsider would not end well. Fortunately, the soldier ant showed no unusual behavior. Mimicking the other black ants, Luo Wen stepped over its head and body, continuing deeper into the nest. The tunnels gradually branched into numerous paths, some wide, others narrow. Luo Wen's current size made the narrower paths impassable. As it was his first visit, Luo Wen hesitated to widen the passages without permission. It might seem impolite. Thus, he stuck to the broader roots. The internal structure of the nest was exceedingly complex. With no specific objective in mind, this was just a reconnaissance trip. Luo Wen meandered through the labyrinth. The accessible paths were all main thoroughfares. After wandering for some time, he eventually entered a massive hollow cavity. This was the neighbor's hatchery. The ground was carpeted with eggs and pupae, interspersed with wriggling larvae. Patrolling soldier ants moved about, surrounded by a swarm of worker ants. These workers busily transported food into the chamber, while others diligently processed the food, swallowing it before regurgitating it to feed the larvae. Amidst them were several yellow bugs. Their yellowish-brown bodies, larger than the worker ants, stood out starkly against the sea of black. But the ants didn't consider them out of place. The yellow bugs acted just like worker ants, consuming the scattered food. However, they skipped the step of regurgitating it to feed the larvae. Watching this, Luo Wen couldn't help but silently applaud. Impressive moves. These yellow bugs really have no shame. Infiltrating someone else's nest and freeloading food and board? No wonder I've only ever seen them enter ant nests but never leave. I was worried this nest might have some secret weapon hidden inside. As it turned out, these freeloaders never intended to leave. Picking up a piece of food from the ground, Luo Wen examined it. It appeared to be a chunk of insect flesh. After finishing it, he grabbed another piece, unfamiliar in appearance, possibly a secretion from some insect or plant. It tasted sweet. Piece after piece, food was scattered everywhere. This was the accumulation of an ant nest with over 1,000 members. Luo Wen began to think he didn't want to leave either. Chapter 27, A New Idea. Since transforming into an insect, Luo Wen had been living a harsh existence. He never imagined stumbling upon such a paradise: food everywhere, eat to fullness, sleep after eating, then wake up and eat again. There was nothing to do but enjoy an endless supply of sustenance. If only he had a computer and internet access, this would have been his dream otaku lifestyle. Sadly, he still had a brood of underlings crying out for food. The thought of a boss lazing about like this left Luo Wen feeling a bit downhearted. After stuffing himself, he roamed the nest for a while. This ant colony was quite large, and deep inside, he discovered a queen ant. The queen was far larger than the soldier ants, not because she was stronger. On the contrary, her upper body seemed overly frail compared to the soldiers. Her size came from her massive abdomen, which accounted for 2/3 of her body. Luo Wen doubted whether she could even drag herself along with her feeble limbs. During his observation, the queen didn't move an inch. Several worker ants scurried around her, ferrying various foods and queuing up to feed her mouth to mouth. This reminded Luo Wen of an embarrassing incident. One of his underlings had once tried to feed him mouth to mouth. Could that ant have mistaken him for a queen back then? Truly a cringeworthy memory. Thankfully, his inner resolve had forced a favorable evolution, granting him his current independent brood nest. Otherwise, if he had turned into something resembling this queen, he might have preferred death. After wandering aimlessly for a while and finding no special weapons or hidden combat units, Luo Wen relaxed and leisurely crawled out of the nest. His first visit to a neighbor's home had been fruitful, leaving him quite satisfied. Returning to the transport team's rendezvous point, he noticed the scout's body had disappeared. Without lingering, Luo Wen hastened back to his brood nest. On the way, he encountered the returning transport team and joined them for the trip home. Once back at the brood nest, Luo Wen checked on the brood nest itself. Everything was in order. It had a steady food supply each day, producing offspring while retaining surplus for growth. Next, he gnawed a piece of tree root to feed Big Black. After that, he went to the hatchery. There were now more than 10 mature black ants. Apart from the transport team, 5 or 6 ants usually stayed home to care for the eggs. The hatchery housed dozens of eggs and larvae. The first batch of larvae had begun to pupate under the worker ants' care. Once they emerged, they would be fully grown small ants. Of course, Luo Wen's hatchery was still far from rivaling the neighbors, but he believed this was only temporary. In time, as he deciphered the functions of certain genetic fragments and amassed enough resource-collecting insects, he would engineer even more powerful creatures. Flattening the ant nest would then become a matter of moments. One day, he too would have his own paradise of food and indulgence, living a life of eat, sleep, and repeat. Imagining this bright future, Luo Wen drifted off to sleep. The next day, Luo Wen woke up early with fresh ideas brewing in his mind. After supplying Big Black with another piece of tree root, he set off with the transport team. Arriving about 10 meters from the neighbor's nest, Luo Wen began digging. This was a major undertaking. Luo Wen spearheaded the excavation, while the transport team removed soil from the tunnel. Whenever he got hungry, he would emerge, demonstrate Luo-style insect combat on a nearby ant, and drag the prey back to share. The hatchery back at the brood nest had a small food reserve, enough to last a day without resupply. It was Luo Wen's first time digging such a long tunnel. His digging speed was fast, but transporting the excavated soil outside was time-consuming. As the tunnel lengthened, this process grew exponentially more tedious. The transport team's efficiency was low, unable to keep up with Luo Wen's pace. Eventually, he had to dig and carry soil out simultaneously. Working tirelessly until nightfall, he had only completed about half the tunnel. Although daytime and nighttime were indistinguishable to Luo Wen, who had previously survived underground without knowing the time of day, he still retained some human habits. For instance, when he saw nightfall, he instinctively felt it was time to sleep even if he wasn't tired, his mind told him it was rest time. He casually buried the tunnel entrance and camouflaged it. Although the new mound of soil was conspicuous, Luo Wen was confident in concealing the entrance. Using his forged ID, he spread a pheromone warning around the area: danger. Do not approach. It should be enough to deter the brainless worker ants. Besides, the scout ants in this direction had suffered heavy casualties recently. Even though the neighbor's nest wasn't far, few ants ventured this way anymore. After taking down 3 patrolling worker ants nearby with the transport team, he divided one on the spot and brought the other 2 back to the brood nest as food reserves. Once home, Luo Wen was too exhausted to move further. Big Black would have to endure hunger for the night. When Luo Wen woke up again and climbed to the surface, dawn hadn't yet broken. Unwilling to venture out in the dark, he first went to the tree roots to replenish fluids. Having eaten ant meat twice yesterday, the ant's acidic body fluids had left him slightly nauseous. After rehydrating, he brought a tree root back for Big Black, who had gone hungry overnight. While pondering his next steps, Luo Wen passed the time until the first light of dawn, then set out with the transport team. Reaching yesterday's buried tunnel, he found it undisturbed. It seemed his pheromone warning had worked well, or perhaps no scouts had passed through this area at all. Under Luo Wen's direction, his team resumed their unfinished work with orderly precision. This time, Luo Wen left 2 temporary storage chambers along the tunnel. While this added some extra labor, they managed to finish the tunnel by nightfall, digging all the way to the area beneath the neighbor's nest. Halting excavation, Luo Wen buried the entrance again and demonstrated Luo-style insect combat for a few spectators. He then brought their vanquished bodies back to the brood nest. After 2 days of preparation, Luo Wen's plan had reached a critical stage. The next morning, he led the transport team out, ready to execute his plan. Returning to the buried tunnel entrance, he found it untouched. A promising start. Leading the team into the tunnel, Luo Wen instructed the transport team to wait in the temporary storage chambers and retreat if they encountered danger. He then crawled out alone. As he moved, Luo Wen couldn't help but wonder whether the transport team could grasp his instructions. Their intelligence was truly lacking. Even slightly complex commands seemed beyond them. He resolved to find a way to improve their intelligence when he had time, at least enough to understand more intricate directives. Spreading his forged identity pheromones, Luo Wen once again arrived at the neighbor's front door. Chapter 28, Hidden Concerns. Luo Wen deftly navigated to the hatchery deep within the ant nest. After a hearty meal, he selected a corner rarely traversed by ants and began digging. Once he had created a small hole, he turned back to seal the opening connecting it to the hatchery. Then he continued digging outward. Pheromones were truly a miraculous tool. After mastering their basic uses, Luo Wen had developed several extended applications. For instance, using marking pheromones as coordinates was not a novel idea. Black ants had long employed such a method. However, while they could only detect these markers by physically touching them with their antennae, Luo Wen could sense his pheromone coordinates from a distance. At this moment, he was digging toward one of his marked coordinate points. This was the labor of the past 2 days with the transport team, the underground passage. As the passage had initially been very close to the ant nest, Luo Wen quickly connected his newly dug tunnel to it. Crawling into the underground passage, he summoned the waiting transport team. Together, they cleared the soil from the new tunnel. Luo Wen used his saliva to reinforce the fresh tunnel and carved out a temporary storage chamber near where the passage approached the nest. He ordered the transport team to stand by in the passage and sealed off the storage chamber's entrance to the passage, carefully erasing the pheromones left by the transport team. With everything in place, Luo Wen returned to the hatchery and began transporting food to the temporary storage chamber. Although a few worker ants passed by during this time, Luo Wen's legitimate identity prevented them from showing any concern. Once he had stored enough food, Luo Wen sealed the connection between the tunnel and the hatchery, releasing pheromones that conveyed a warning to stay away. Then, he reopened the link between the storage chamber and the underground passage, summoned the transport team, and ordered them to carry the stored food back to the brood nest. The plan proceeded smoothly. Like parasites on the ant nest, the brood nest began a life of indulgence. Luo Wen was temporarily freed from the strenuous tasks of hunting, no longer needing to find isolated worker ants or demonstrate his Luo-style insect combat technique. All he needed to do was transport food to the storage chamber at intervals. Unfortunately, such idyllic days could not last. The ant nest supported a population of over 1,000 ants, and their daily food consumption was staggering. Despite this, their stockpile of food was limited. This was evident from the number of giant mandible soldier ants, a specialized combat unit. Even with the vast population of black ants, they could only sustain around 10 of these non-productive soldier types. As the days passed and the brood nest's population grew, the food reserves in the neighboring hatchery visibly dwindled. The black ants became agitated, confused by the mysterious decline in food. Luo Wen was equally worried. The past days of comfort had been utterly enjoyable, but the number of ants in the brood nest continued to climb. He had already stopped having the brood nest directly hatch 2 adult ants daily, instead allocating resources for its growth and limiting daily output to 10 eggs. Even so, within a few days, when the pupating larvae emerged as adults, the brood nest would add roughly 10 ants daily. Combined with the continuous hatching of another 10 eggs, the rapidly increasing mouths to feed would soon overwhelm the ant nest's resources. Luo Wen needed a solution. Before he could devise one, his attention was caught by the yellow bugs in the hatchery. Luo Wen had already come to regard the ant nest as his food production base, so the sight of these parasites was particularly vexing. With a thought, an idea formed in his mind. Unsure if it would work, he decided to test it. Luo Wen slowly approached a yellow bug, which was feasting voraciously and paid no attention to his presence. Quietly, Luo Wen spat a glob of saliva onto the bug before swiftly retreating. The saliva contained a concoction of pheromones, essentially mimicking an alien identity, one unrecognized by the ant nest. The hatchery was a vital facility, endlessly supplying fresh labor for the nest. Its importance was self-evident. When an unfamiliar scent of identity suddenly appeared in such a crucial location, the nearby worker ants, who were feeding the larvae, immediately noticed. They began to surround the yellow bug, while a few quickly scurried off to alert the patrolling giant mandible soldier ants. Oblivious to the impending danger, the feasting yellow bug remained completely unguarded. Its prolonged safety had dulled its instincts, and it could not fathom that someone as cunning as Luo Wen would be plotting against it. From a distance, Luo Wen watched as the giant mandible soldier ants approached. It was his first time witnessing the combat prowess of these fearsome warriors. The ants clamped their powerful jaws onto the unsuspecting parasite. With a sharp twist of their heads, the yellow bug was torn in two. Despite its resilience, the yellow bug's upper half was still moving, but it had no chance to escape. In an instant, the worker ants swarmed over it. Luo Wen watched with a mix of awe and dread. Relying solely on pheromone-based identification to distinguish friend from foe was a glaring vulnerability. Fortunately, his brood nest employed 2 identification systems. Otherwise, any intelligent insect capable of altering pheromones could easily infiltrate and sabotage an ant nest from within. Thankfully, he was the only such insect for now. However, given the vastness of the world, who could guarantee that other similarly evolved creatures wouldn't exist? Reflecting on this, Luo Wen decided that 2 identification systems might not suffice. Once his abilities improved, he would develop additional systems to ensure security. Just like the old human television shows he remembered, in the past, when human technology was underdeveloped, they relied on sight to distinguish friend from foe. This allowed masterful disguise experts to infiltrate enemy ranks easily. It wasn't until technological advancements brought fingerprint, retinal, facial, and DNA recognition that such vulnerabilities were mitigated. These lessons from the past were worth remembering. For now, this was a lower priority. His current dual system approach was sufficient for the time being. His immediate task was to deal with the remaining yellow bugs to prevent further food wastage. The other yellow bugs showed no reaction to their companion's death, continuing to eat and drink as if nothing had happened. One by one, Luo Wen spat the fake pheromone-laden saliva onto them and watched as the worker and soldier ants eliminated them. With the yellow bugs cleared, not only was a significant food burden removed, but their bodies themselves contributed to the nest's food reserves. Even so, it was only a drop in the ocean. With the brood nest on the brink of a population explosion, Luo Wen feared the ant nest would soon reach its breaking point. Chapter 29, Discovered. The solutions to the current problem were either to find new black ant nests to share the burden or, once the number of insects in the brood nest reached a sufficient size, to completely annihilate the ant nest, turning its inhabitants into food and claiming the territory. The two approaches were not mutually exclusive. Luo Wen could search for new black ant nests while simultaneously infiltrating and eroding the neighbor's nest. However, this would mean Luo Wen would become busy again. Deploying a few camouflage bugs to infiltrate the ant nest and feast without drawing suspicion was feasible. But expecting them to handle Luo Wen's task stealing food while cleaning up traces was unlikely given their limited intelligence. If any mistakes exposed their actions and led the black ants to track them back to the brood nest, it would spell disaster. The brood nest's current combat capabilities were far from sufficient to withstand an assault. Thus, Luo Wen had no choice but to personally handle the undercover work and food transport operations in the ant nest. As for exploration, Luo Wen had already scouted the area within a few dozen meters around the brood nest. To find another black ant nest, he would need to venture farther. Currently, most of the insects in the brood nest were modeled after black ants. Lacking vision, they relied on close-range contact with their antennae to gather information. This method posed numerous dangers, and the farther they traveled, the higher the risk of encountering threats. Given the current population in the brood nest, it would be difficult to sustain such heavy losses. Luo Wen needed new types of insects with functional eyesight, capable of detecting potential dangers from a distance and reporting back the gathered intelligence. But once again, he faced the same fundamental problem. While Luo Wen could likely configure the required physical traits, he couldn't enhance the insect's intelligence. The insects in the brood nest were competent in repetitive, mechanical tasks but struggled with anything more complex. They couldn't fully comprehend Luo Wen's instructions, meaning he had to personally oversee all critical missions. In the future, when he had more time and resources, Luo Wen resolved to create intelligent insects. He didn't need many, just one or two capable of leading others would suffice. Grumbling aside, Luo Wen diligently attended to his responsibilities. Each day, he transported enough materials to the temporary storage chamber to keep the transport teams occupied for a day, sealing the passage to the hatchery tightly and surrounding the area with pheromones signaling danger and warning others to stay away. After completing this task, Luo Wen would crawl out of the ant nest to scout farther afield. The brood nest was also developing steadily. The first batch of pupating larvae had emerged, forming a new generation of adult ants. As they matured, they would gradually take on various tasks within the colony. The brood nest itself had grown larger. Although Luo Wen's size had also increased recently, it seemed unlikely he could still carry the massive structure. Applying his principle of preparing for danger during times of peace, Luo Wen used Big Black as a template, removing the gene for burrower legs after observing that the oversized giant mandibles conflicted with burrowing efficiency. These mandibles, wider than the body itself, made underground movement cumbersome. Additionally, Luo Wen incorporated pheromone genes for communication and identity recognition. Using this template, the brood nest produced a dozen eggs. If they successfully hatched, these insects would become specialized fighters tasked with defending the brood nest. This was Luo Wen's first time using a self-designed template to produce insects from eggs. It was an entirely new experiment. He didn't know if such artificial genetic configurations could support a complete developmental process from egg to maturity. If these insects, with their entirely novel genetic sequences, could grow into fully developed, mature adults, it would signify a breakthrough. When resources were abundant, the brood nest could produce a series of insects with unnatural but highly advantageous traits. By then, the brood nest's influence would expand exponentially, like a snowball gaining momentum. It would no longer need to parasitize the ant nest to grow. Energized by these promising thoughts, Luo Wen threw himself into his work with renewed enthusiasm. Events also seemed to be unfolding in a favorable direction. A few days later, Luo Wen's efforts bore fruit. He discovered another black ant nest in the opposite direction of the brood nest. This new nest was much larger. Luo Wen counted over 50 soldier ants within it, suggesting a total population of 3,000 to 4,000. The ant nest not only boasted a much larger hatchery but also had 2 of them. Additionally, there were several food storage chambers. Worker ants ground food into powder with their mandibles, secreting a protective substance to prevent spoilage. Naturally, the hatchery was filled with even more yellow bugs, parasitic creatures brazenly stealing Luo Wen's resources. Infuriated, he spat on each one, dooming them to annihilation. This new ant nest was over 100 meters from the brood nest. Its vast population and extensive patrol coverage meant there were no blind spots. Luo Wen would need to dig at least 50 meters of underground tunnel to transport food. It was a monumental task. Fortunately, Luo Wen now had many underlings. He assigned over 20 ants to the transport teams to handle food transport, left another 20 newly emerged ants to tend to the larvae, and led the remaining dozens in a massive excavation project. Luo Wen's daily schedule became packed. At dawn, he would transport food from the first ant nest to the storage chamber, seal the tunnel, and leave the transport teams to work independently. Then, he would hurry back home, gather his excavation team, and head to the second ant nest to dig a new tunnel. Along the way, he'd practice his Luo-style insect combat technique with a few of the new neighbors, ensuring his skills remained sharp. The black ants who watched the performance often couldn't afford his appearance fee and were forced to pay with their lives, becoming food for the excavation team. Time flew by, and as the massive smuggling tunnel neared completion, trouble arose with the transport teams. The first nest's smuggling tunnel had been dug close to the patrol's blind spot, just over 10 meters from the ant nest. However, as Luo Wen shifted focus to the second nest and stopped performing his combat demonstrations, the number of scout worker ants in the area gradually increased. Today, by sheer bad luck, a transport team carrying food emerged from the tunnel and came face to face with a scout worker ant. The scout worker ant noticed a large group of ants resembling itself but lacking proper identification. It immediately moved forward to challenge them. The transport teams, not known for their patience, responded aggressively. After a heated antenna duel, a fight broke out. Although the scout worker ant was outnumbered, this was the transport team's first battle. Despite their superior numbers, they allowed the worker ant to escape. The transport teams didn't think much of it. However, when they returned to the tunnel with more food, the worker ant had brought reinforcements, lying in wait to ambush them. Chapter 30, Completion. After a deeply unfriendly exchange, the two sides engaged in a fierce battle. Initially, the fight was evenly matched, but since this was the enemy's home turf, reinforcements kept arriving in droves. The arrival of a giant mandible soldier ant quickly turned the tide. This specialized combat unit charging into a battlefield full of worker ants was like a strongman rampaging through a kindergarten, utterly unstoppable. The soldier ant rampaged through the transport team, meeting no resistance and quickly leaving them in shambles. Although the bugs produced by the brood nest used black ants as their template and looked identical to them, there was a critical difference. Unlike the scouting worker ants from the original ant colony, which would retreat when outnumbered, the bugs from the brood nest fought to the death. As a result, the entire transport team was annihilated. Luo Wen didn't notice anything amiss until the second day after the incident. The night of the brawl, Luo Wen returned to the brood nest with the excavation team after dark. The black ants in the brood nest were numerous enough to be noticeable but not overwhelming, numbering around a few dozen. Since they were all busily working, Luo Wen didn't immediately notice the absence of a dozen or so ants. He simply enjoyed some nectar, checked on Big Black, and retired to his small chamber for rest. It wasn't until the next day, after waking up and preparing to take a head count, that Luo Wen realized the transport team had not returned the previous night. His heart sank. Something had gone wrong. Reacting quickly, Luo Wen thought things through and pinpointed the oversight that led to this disaster. He deduced the situation with about 90% accuracy. He left the brood nest alone to investigate. Not far from the entrance, he encountered scouting worker ants, likely tracking the transport team's trail. Luo Wen didn't alarm them. Instead, he erased any traces they could follow and laid down new pheromones, redirecting their search toward the direction of ant nest number 2. Whether the scouts from both sides clashed wasn't his concern, he had successfully distanced the brood nest from the incident. He continued to the exit of the smuggling tunnel. Along the way, Luo Wen spotted many scouting worker ants, but by then, he had swapped his identification pheromones, so even if they encountered him, it wouldn't matter. The battle marks at the tunnel entrance confirmed Luo Wen's suspicions a large-scale skirmish had occurred. Although the battlefield had been cleaned up, the lingering pheromones bearing messages like enemy, alert, and combat revealed much about what had happened. Instead of entering the tunnel, Luo Wen climbed to the surface and casually strolled into the ant nest. Inside the brood chamber, he found the transport team, or rather, their dismembered remains scattered as various components. Luo Wen sighed, unsure if Black 2 or Black 3 were among the casualties. All black ants looked the same to him, and with their numbers steadily increasing in the brood nest, he had long lost track of who was who. However, he felt no sorrow. Maybe in the distant future, as his memories as an insect accumulated, they might suppress his human memories. But for now, Luo Wen, newly transformed into a bug, retained his human soul and perspective. It was difficult for him to feel emotional about a few ants. He never considered these ants his kin, they were tools. He hatched and fed them purely to make his life more comfortable. His sigh was more about self-reflection and frustration over the loss of so many tools due to his lack of foresight. After having a meal in the brood chamber, Luo Wen didn't linger. He left the nest and returned home. Ant nest number 1 was too dangerous for now, so he decided not to send anyone there for the time being. This would allow the ants there to rest and stockpile supplies. His focus shifted to ant nest number 2. The smuggling tunnel there, built in a patrol blind spot, was much safer. With a little overtime work, it could be completed in a day or two. The brood nest's food reserves were still sufficient to last for that duration without issue. Back at the brood nest, Luo Wen adjusted the configuration of the eggs at the brood nest. This time, the eggs were based on the black ant template but enhanced with burrower ant traits, adding a pair of digging limbs. Transporting supplies on the surface was far too dangerous. Luo Wen needed a specialized digging team. He planned to excavate an underground tunnel linking ant nest number 1, ant nest number 2, and his brood nest. This would mitigate the risks of surface transportation. In the future, he envisioned connecting ant nest number 3, number 4, and even more nests into an expansive underground network. Digging alone wasn't feasible, as it contradicted his core goal: eat, sleep, and evolve while lounging. He wasn't about to work himself to death for his tools. Although Luo Wen had this idea earlier, he hadn't been in a hurry to act on it. He wanted to wait until his prior experiments proved successful before reallocating resources. The recent setback forced him to accelerate his plans. Fortunately, the previously configured eggs, while not yet hatched, remained vibrant and full of life. It seemed only a matter of time before they hatched into larvae. This gave Luo Wen the confidence to move forward with his plans. The viability of the eggs confirmed the feasibility of the modifications. With the team assembled, Luo Wen led the untrained excavation crew to work. For now, he did most of the digging, while the ants were responsible for transporting excavated soil out of the pit and reinforcing the tunnels. 2 days later, the smuggling tunnel at ant nest number 2 was complete. With his forged identification pheromones, Luo Wen infiltrated the brood chamber, dug a temporary path to connect with the tunnel, and began transporting food. The brood nest's food reserve steadily increased. Luo Wen dug 2 additional storage chambers, confident they would eventually come into use. Time passed smoothly, and the newly hatched larvae from Big Black's modified eggs emerged. These larvae resembled the white grubs Luo Wen had first encountered upon arriving in this world. Seeing them triggered a wave of nostalgia. Those white grubs had been immensely helpful to him, tirelessly assisting with tasks and enduring his treatment without complaint. When his teeth weren't fully developed, they would even gnaw through tree roots for him. They were truly good bugs. Not long after, the larvae from the second batch of modified eggs, which incorporated burrower ant traits, also hatched. These larvae looked similar to ordinary ant larvae, with only subtle differences. During this time, the brood nest's population steadily increased. The losses to the transport team were not only replenished but surpassed. With a larger workforce, Luo Wen and his ants re-excavated the smuggling tunnel for ant nest number 1. This time, the tunnel directly connected to the brood nest from underground.